Welcome to the Simply Real Life podcast. I'm Sarah, the founder of Simply Real Health, here to help you simplify, amplify, and elevate your life. This show is for those of you who want the real talk on how to live a more intuitive and intentional life, a life that's healthy from the inside out, and one that feels more effortless, aligned, simple, and more alive. We cover it all, from health, wellness, mindset, motherhood, daily habits and rituals, to business and relationships, creativity and growth, and tiny tricks to feeling your best, and the energetics behind it all filled with personal stories, unfiltered conversations, and of course, answering all of your burning questions, all in the way of simplicity and keeping it real, so that you can create your own version of your healthiest life. Let's do it. Hello, and welcome back to the show this week. I'm so glad that you're here and just wanted to tell you thank you so much for taking a tiny bit of time to listen and tune in and be a part of this community and this show. It is something that is just continuing to rapidly grow, and it's so fun to see and to get to talk to you guys about these things that are a little bit more intricate and a little bit more detailed and very, very specific. So today's question is, to be totally honest, one that I have been maybe avoiding slightly, because I feel like it's something that is so personal. And not that it's this deep, intimate details, but just personal in that everybody's experience is so different. And especially when it comes to the topic of parenthood and motherhood, which is what this episode is about, I find that everybody just has such a different experience. I think based on expectation, what they thought that it was going to be or look like, based on their physical experience, maybe that's even getting to be pregnant or to witness the birth of a baby coming into the world. There's so many different things that impact how we experience something and the mental thoughts that we have behind it that turn into our actual physical experience. But there is a question that I do get asked all the time from you all, and that is to talk a little bit more about the transition of going between having no kids at all, 0 kids, to 1, and then also any insights or tips or advice for going from 1 child to then 2. And so I thought today's episode could be fun to walk you through both where I was at before having our first baby and then also into the second, because there's so many things that I think I learned both times that were slightly different from each other. And then after just sharing my experience of both, I also wanted to summarize some pieces of advice that I feel were the most helpful, especially looking back if I was to do it all over again based on my own personal situation. These are the things I've gleaned from it, learned from it, maybe would have been helpful to know before walking into it. But with all of this, please know this is just my own personal experience, and I'm sharing this in hopes that there may be some tiny things that you could think or take into your own life. Not everything is going to be exactly the same, but hopefully just giving you some things to think about, some things to talk about, maybe with your partner, just things if you're going into that headspace, or maybe you're pregnant or you have this vision for the future of what does that look like? Because let me tell you, it is a transition, and all big life transitions, it's that unknown or that unexpected, and you're not quite sure exactly how it's going to go down and what to expect. For me, that gave me a lot of anxiety, not knowing what it was going to be like. I could obviously look around at a lot of my other friends and family members and people who had had kids before me, and I could see how it was playing out for them. But it's always different when it's you. And I feel very lucky that I was one of the later ones in my friend group and in my family to start having kids, because it gave me that bird's eye view of getting to see how a lot of different people did it, how the transition at least looked from the outside in, just kind of their vibe, their feel, what it looked like, to give me some general sense of, okay, this is maybe what to expect or things to think about, or I like how they're doing that way. That seems like to really like match up with how I would also want to do things. And then you also see, of course, the flip side of I do not want it to look like that. So I found that, I think, probably the most helpful starting place. But besides that, knowing and hearing how other people do it, and especially so knowing how I roll with things, which is usually wanting to be very intentional and very grounded in my decisions, and always trying to at least think through, plan ahead as much as possible, which is not always possible, especially with this subject. But just trying to wrap your brain around not only letting things happen to you and letting things play out, but also, okay, but if you had the choice, how would you want it to look? And how would you want to set that up? And obviously, that's very hard to do until you actually are in it and living it and experiencing it. So I thought it would be hopefully helpful to hear my own experience in doing that, of what I thought it would be, and then what it ended up truly looking like, and then the little tweaks and changes to wrap it up with some little helpful hints or pieces of advice that you can also take away into your own life. So let me start at the beginning here, because I think this background is probably going to be very important to understanding where I was at before getting pregnant. And for those of you who don't know this story, I have a full blog post on it of my thoughts on motherhood. And becoming a mom was something I always knew that I wanted when I thought about my life in a long-term way. But when it actually came down to the timing of it, I knew that I wanted to have at least a year of being married. And Kyle and I got married a little bit later than the rest of our friends. We were actually one of the last of our friends to get married. And it was something where I was okay, once we do this first year and we have that sacred time together, which is something I really, really wanted, to build a very strong foundation. And I'm so glad that we did and that we were able to do that. From that time, I did have a lot of fear about becoming a mom. I knew it was this long-term thing that I wanted, but then it never felt, okay, this is the right time. I never felt I was truly ready. I never felt like it was something where I'm just had this beating and bleeding heart for I'm ready to be a mom right now. And I did have a lot of fear and worry about, does this mean I'm not supposed to be a mom, or that this is not going to be a great fit, or that everything's going to crumble? What if I don't like it? What if I don't have that maternal instinct? I had a lot of those types of conversations and thoughts in my head for at least a full year. And I remember sitting down as we got to after the year mark, that deadline had passed. And then I still was having these nervous thoughts. And up until that point, I had put so much time and energy into my business. That was my baby. And anybody who had started a business, you know exactly what I'm saying. It requires so much time and love and attention and almost all hours of the day, especially when you're first starting out, to really get things off the ground. And so I couldn't even really imagine doing that and working like I was and being able to be a mother too. It just didn't comprehend. The pieces didn't fit together. And that's because they wouldn't have really fit together great. And so I had to take myself through this process of knowing and noticing that I had fears around it, and then processing through all those things. So for me, that looked like a lot of journaling of, okay, what am I actually afraid of here? And writing down those fears specifically. And I always find that when I write things down, the thoughts in my head, the real truths, the things that I am definitely afraid to say out loud or to admit, because of how they sound or how they would come off, or it's kind of embarrassing to admit these worst case scenarios or the fears that you have in your head, but that they do take over and our brains think that they're real sometimes. So the action process for me of writing things down helps me see it more clearly, see the whole situation enough to the point of then being able to switch on, well, is there anything I could do about that? So I had probably many sessions in my journal, let's be honest, of writing through, here's all the things I'm nervous about or afraid of, or that I know will change or I don't want to change. And that was the starting point to really wrap my head around, okay, what things are actually true and would be worth having conversations with my husband and with my family, and just getting a clearer sense of what the setup will be like. That was the most helpful thing. I think just admitting that there was some sort of resistance or there was some fear at play, so, so helpful because you can see all of the millions of ways that our brains try to make these obstacles that more often than not, most of them are very figure outable, to use Marie Forleo's term. Everything is figure outable. And so being able to see that logically and clearly, I think was one of the best things that I did, really. What are the things that might come up the most that I do feel like if we could plan for it or figure out some solutions or ideas, that put me in much more of an easeful, peaceful state, knowing that we knew that ahead of time, we could plan for it, chalk it out, and so forth. So after working through my fears, when we were actually getting ready to try, as many of you know, this is also when I got that diagnosis of PCOS. So you can go back and listen to previous episodes if you'd like. But that was a total game changer because it brought it away from the emotional feels about it and then actually 100% confirmed that I was ready. So that was definitely a big turning point of I do actually really want this and I'm willing to make all these changes to try and heal my body and set it up for the most success, hopefully, in a pregnancy. And then when I actually got pregnant, I was so sick. I was so incredibly sick for 6 months. And that was something that for me came completely out of the blue. I knew that many women got nauseous and that it was, oh yeah, you drink ginger tea or you have crackers. But what I was experiencing was complete next level. I'm not kidding you, throwing up multiple times a day, multiple times an hour, only being able to lay on the couch, not being able to work because I couldn't look at my phone or my computer, and just feeling so depleted, exhausted. I felt nothing like myself at all. And for me, naively, before that, I was thinking, I'm so healthy. Pregnancy, I'm sure, will be a complete breeze. It'll be great. I'll still work out. I'm still going to do all my things. I'm still going to eat really healthy. It was not that. And I think looking back, I can now see how that actually set me up for so much more success in becoming a mother, because it was the first lesson where it was like, this is not only about you. You are surrendering a lot of your own mental space, your own body, everything to call in a child. And that takes so much energy and time and surrender. And I didn't have a lot of that, before. And so it was this wake up call to me of, number one, this is not about me. I'm going to have to make a lot of changes and do things that I would maybe not want to do or not want to live like or not want to be like. But ultimately, there's always a reason and there's always lessons behind that. And I think looking back now, that experience made me think. I remember so many times laying on the couch feeling so horrible and kind of depressed and sad, but then also, yeah, but I'm so lucky. I am so lucky that this is a possibility, that the baby's healthy. It's going to be okay. And it's a short-term thing in itself. And I can get through this. So it really built up a lot of mental stamina because I had to. And it really built up a lot of appreciation for the way that I felt normally. And so all the things that I wasn't able to do or that not feeling good made me appreciate feeling good so much more. And I remember laying there thinking, I know people talk about when they first have babies that it's really rough. It's a big transition and so much changes and you're not getting sleep. And it's like, whoa, what just happened? But for me, that transition happened, I think, when I was very sick, because I remember thinking, well, at least when the baby's here, my body is back. I can eat foods that I find fueling. I can do things that make me feel good. Whereas the pregnancy part felt so out of my control. Like nothing I did, none of the little tricks, none of the little tips helped. And so it was that deep appreciation of when this baby is out, I'm going to be so thankful, right? So thankful. So that is an important thing to mention because when Noah, my son, was first born, it was not an easy transition. All of my friends were worried about me. They were like, oh my gosh, because he came out, he was really small. He didn't take to nursing very well. My milk didn't come in for about 2 weeks. All the doctors were stressing out. He was dropping weight. But I always felt like it's okay. I've got this. Like, this is nothing compared to how I felt for over 6 months of my life. And at least feeling somewhat slightly back to my normal self, I'm like, I've got this. I can figure out the nursing thing. And I was just so grateful to feel good again, even though I was sleepy and I'm trying to figure out nursing. So I'm trying to play with my foods and take things out and add things in around the clock. Like every time I would nurse, then I would pump right after to try and get my milks to come. And then when it did come in, it was a very low supply. So just figuring out all those things, to me, nothing compared to that feeling of being pregnant and flat on my back, just flat and feeling horrible and throwing up all the time and not able to eat anything that felt like it was life-giving to me. And just the awe of that in general, of how could he possibly, aside from being smaller and low on the weight scale, he was healthy. It was like, okay, I've got this. So to me, that was the first thing of how you're mentally coming into it. What are your expectations of it? And how do you think that it's going to be? And making sure that that's a realistic view, like not pie in the sky and rainbows and butterflies is just going to be amazing. It's just a huge change, I think, no matter what. So maybe getting real with yourself first. Like, what do you think it's going to look like? Can you talk to people who have had their first baby and what was it like for them? Knowing that a lot of times people want to scare you or they want to say the worst possible things, but it is all about your expectations, I think, coming into it and what your previous experience has been leading up until that moment. So the second piece of advice I have on this is knowing that you will be softened and that you will be humbled. It is how you are reacting to the things that are playing out in front of you, like tight grip, control on how you always used to do things versus this is where I can find a new way to do things. What my end goal is, how do I want to feel? And then are there any other possible ways that that could look or feel? So in that process, knowing that nobody has it easy breezy, but that little bit of intention, planning, managing, or looking at your expectations, while also the first piece of advice, looking at some of those fears and walking through what are possible ways that that could be softened or maybe avoided completely or little workarounds. I felt like that helped so much. So one of the other lessons that then became very apparent to me is that my way of operating of I'll do it myself. I've got it, like the super capable classic. I've got everything. I don't need to ask for help. We've got it. I've got it handled. That's really how I absolutely operated before, both in my business and in my personal life and in my family life. And so having our first baby was very much an awakening to you don't have to do it all. And if you do try to do that, you're going to end up very stressed out and kind of miserable and missing the whole joy and experience having a newborn. And so it was such, I won't say it was easy because it wasn't, but it was such a great practice for me in truly starting to ask for help. And I had to do that in a lot of ways. That actually started in pregnancy for me because I couldn't work. I really could not do anything of my normal working life. And so I had to ask. I had to ask the women on my team, can you do this? Can I walk you through how I do this? And can you take that over? And it was so hard for me internally, but it is truly one of the best skills I have learned since becoming a mother is that there is no prize at the end of the day for doing it all yourself. There's a little bit of ego involved and a little bit of pride of I got it, I can handle it, which is great in theory, but it's not worth doing that to yourself because there's so many other ways that you can use that time and energy if you're just okay with asking for help and receiving that support. And truly, that first year after having a baby, that is the time to call in all the help that you can, accept all the support and not feel guilty about it, or you have these stories around what that means or what it means about your character or your capabilities or what you can handle. If you are choosing to nurse, there are so many hours in the day where you physically cannot do the things that you used to be able to do, even just washing dishes or putting stuff away around the house. Like everything has shifted and changed. And so for me, it was asking for help from my mom and from my mother-in-law and from friends and people making food and dropping it off and accepting that. even though I'm the queen of cooking, I'm the queen of doing meals and I got it. It was such a helpful thing to release some of that and be okay with other people helping, because it is such a gift when you actually let somebody else help you. And you have to remember that it's not only about you, which is a little theme that we are starting to see here. I also will say either coming up with some sort of plan between you and your partner, or between you and neighbors, friends, in-laws, grandparents, of some sort of way that you are supported with all of the other tasks that are required around the house. And I remember that this was a time when we first brought in a house cleaner. And I know that that's not available to everybody, and that is very much a privilege. But starting to look at my time in a very specific way. I could be spending my time with my baby because that was needed and necessary, especially nursing and figuring out those first couple months, finding our rhythms with things, all the different doctor's appointments, having some sort of plan where you are not the one that is in charge of all the other household things, the laundry, the dishes, putting stuff away. It is a chaotic season. And so either making peace with that it may be a little chaotic, and it's more important for you to rest and take care of yourself and take care of the baby than it is for everything to be perfectly clean in your house. That's a mental shift that would probably help. And two, seeking help and support wherever you can. Like, it is so helpful, and it may not be forever, but in that short term, making some sort of plan so that you don't feel that extra stress on top of everything else. The next thing that was really interesting for me to learn along this process was that with work, I had this vision of after maternity leave, like after the newborn days, those first 3 months are over, that I would be right back into work and that nothing would really change. And the truth was that if I was choosing to nurse and pump and do all the things, that left very short windows of time for me to work. And also, I didn't quite realize how my brain was not necessarily on. Like, I did not have that creative fire or drive. And I started to worry. I remember being not quite sure at the end of maternity leave. Am I excited to go back to work? I don't know. Like, I'm not really sure. It felt a little foggy. It was not such a strong feeling of like, oh my God, I can't imagine working. But it was like, what can I really do in those short windows? I'm not really sure. And it felt like there were so many other necessary things that I could be doing in that time. That was the only time to have a bite to eat quickly, without a baby attached to you, or maybe he was taking a nap, or it was the only time that I had if I wanted to go to the bathroom or take a breath of fresh air outside. Like, it felt like there were so many other things in those small windows of time at first that I just totally didn't expect. I thought I would just kind of jump back into work. And in my experience, I kept waiting for that to come where I was like, when does this get easier? This feels really hard. How are moms doing this? How are you trying to take care of both when it feels like your brain is just in one place? And that's very much a natural, normal thing and a change that happens in our brain. And it's not really talked about. Our hormones have completely shifted, let alone from pregnancy, but have just shifted in general. And everything is really depleted, right? After pregnancy, your body just gets sucked dry of so many nutrients. And then if you're nursing on top of that, it's like times 10. And so it's really this recuperation healing time for 6 months, and having that mentality of going easier on yourself with less pressure if possible. And I know that's not always realistic in everybody's personal situations and work situations, but knowing those first 6 months especially are not how it's going to be. It's just that short amount of time. I kept waiting and thinking like, okay, when is this going to feel more normal? And for me, it was definitely closer to the 10-month mark or 11-month mark where I felt like I could maybe do a workout again, or the nap schedule was a little bit more predictable to be able to plan for meetings. That threw me completely for a loop with work. I'm like, I don't know when he's doing anything. Every day it changes a little bit, and we'd be sleeping in the morning until 9 because awake all night doing nursing and pumping and changing diapers and everything in between. So I feel like it was definitely towards that 10-month mark where it felt a little bit more consistency or able to plan a little bit better. And a lot of this is probably nursing related. So if you're not planning to do that, then this may be completely different for you. With work and with my brain, I will say it took about 18 months to feel back in my groove, to feel actually inspired again and creative and having that drive and that excitement and just like, okay, I've got this. And like what you learn along the way of how you think it will be and how you think you will feel can be very different than what is. And so being able to work with what you've got in the moment, still continuing to show up for yourself the best you can, but it just may look different. This was the beginning of me doing 10-minute workouts because sometimes that's all it was. And I was finding that if I made excuses of, well, 10 minutes is nothing, what's that going to do? It doesn't count, then I just would never be doing anything. And that would make me feel anxious and not good. And I didn't like that feeling of not taking care of myself in that way. So things will shift and look different, and you have to just continually be okay with like, how can I get creative here? What things can I do? How can I make this work? Instead of being frustrated that it doesn't look like what it used to in your life, and really trying to stay true to how do I want to feel? What things get me that feeling? What actions or things can I do right now that are manageable? So this leads me to advice number 3, which is setting up your home for success. Before having a baby, I was such a fan of going outside the house for a workout. I used to go to the gym. I would drive for 20, 25 minutes. I loved this class. It started my day. It was awesome. I loved the community. I was so motivated in a class setting versus trying to do it on my own. But that didn't pan out. That was no longer really a feasible option without lining up tons of childcare and having the schedule be perfect. And that just didn't happen most days. So setting up your house for success, meaning, do you have a place that you feel relaxed in your house? Like I remember even just the act of taking a bath or shower by myself in those early days was so helpful. But identifying what are the places or things I could do at home if the baby is sleeping and if I don't have childcare, what are the things I can do? One of those things for me was walking. So getting a really good carrier and a really good stroller so that was something that I could do with baby. That also made me feel really good. That was also when I ordered my spin bike, the first one, the Peloton knockoff that I first had. And that was such a game changer for me. But none of those things came into play until after I had a baby and realized, okay, this may not be looking like it used to, but that doesn't mean that there aren't a ton of things that I could do. I just have to change how it looks or where I do it or what it looks like or the amount of time that it is. And I think being flexible in terms of those things would really save you a lot of hassle and a lot of stress. So the next thing that I'll say is that having a baby was this huge upgrade to my priorities and made me more efficient than ever. I used to really pride myself. I was very efficient before. I could get a lot done. However, that holds no flame to what happened after, which was the realization of here are the very short amount of hours or time I have to pour back into myself and re-nourishing myself after that pregnancy experience and taking care of my mental health and emotional health, especially when your hormones are all over the map, to then jumping back in at work and not just jumping back into a job where you can just follow along. It's like, I'm the founder of a company, like I run a business and there's no such thing as taking a back seat. So becoming so efficient with my time, even more than I ever had. And I really had to come up with some systems of what is the most important thing. And I really say top 3. What are the 3 most important things that I have to get done today? And I just started noticing where things were taking up my time and energy that didn't produce an output that felt worth spending time doing it. So even things like looking at my email, I'm spending so much time just trying to respond to emails. However, when I look at the actual efficiency of that at the end of the day, unless it's related to a specific client or like a specific program or something that is a revenue producing income stream, then spending all of my time doing that is not the best use of my time. So it really helped me start to bring in more people and hiring a team to help with a lot of those tasks that could be done by people other than just me. And that I was then able to focus on more tasks and the roles and experiences of the founder. And those are things that only I can do. And not only was that more fulfilling and I felt more creative and I felt more inspired, but it was so helpful. Just that restructuring of what are my priorities today. I know I have a finite window of time. I need to get it done. Let's get to work here. And not having a crazy long list of 5 to 8 things, but 3. And looking at not only what is the most urgent, but what is the most important. Just to borrow a phrase from Franklin Covey, a little throwback. What is the most important work, the deep work, the stuff that's not related to email and Slack messages and Instagram? It's not any of those things. It's the actual creativity behind things, creating programs. It's designing things. It's me writing the baby food files. That takes deep work and time and intention. But having my hours of childcare be filled with those types of things that actually move the needle forward and move the business forward, move my brain forward, even as a founder, that was the type of thing that was so helpful. And I think if you don't run a business, this can still apply to you. Getting your entire task list of ideas is probably not going to happen most days. And then you're going to start feeling horrible and that you didn't get stuff done, and really being aware of where you're placing your worth. Is your worth based on how much you get done and your productivity? Or is it based on like who you are and the things that you are actually creating that can help other people or change things or move things forward? And so I think that little tip of just your top 3 every day is so helpful. And then you can have other things on the side. I always have a little list of a personal life or household. These things would be great, but that's also okay if they're not today. Could be tomorrow, could be on the weekend. These are just in my brain, keeping track of those things. And then if I get those big 3 done for work, then I can fill in with some of the other tasks. It also is helpful to be looking at the list. Are these tasks things that only I can do? I think that applies to a lot of different roles, a lot of different types of work. This could apply if you are staying at home with your children. There's so many different things and ways that you can seek support or outsourcing things, or maybe you stop doing them completely because it's not worth your time and energy. I can think of probably, at least 30 things that we no longer do because it wasn't driving the results. It wasn't therefore worth the time and effort, stress and energy. We're just like, let's just stop. Let's just take those things off and let's double down on the things that are working or that are very helpful and or productive. Another thing that I found really helpful was just the realization that overall, in becoming a parent, you are truly becoming a new version of yourself. The old version of yourself doesn't exist. And so there sometimes can be maybe a mourning process of that, of like, I really miss this. I think if you're aware of that and you do things earlier on while you still can, or while you're pregnant, to really like do all those things that you have been wanting to do, and also knowing too that you can do so many of those things with kids. It may just look slightly different, or you have to get a little creative how that looks, but it doesn't mean that you're not going to be able to do those things. Even something like traveling. Kyle and I love traveling, and you know what? We still do it. We do it all the time with our kids. Does it feel a little different? Yes. Does the packing look different? Yes. Is there different prep and planning? Yes. But it's still worth it. There's always workarounds. There's always ways to do and experience and live your life. But I will say in that first year, it's just such a tender time. Give yourself that first year before you start adding on expectations or trying to do things the same that you used to. You may find that there are a lot of things that you can go back to how you've always done them, and it works. You may find some other things that are surprising that you can't, or that you have to change, or that they just look slightly different. But I think for me, coming back to that realization of when the baby is born, also the mother is born too, or the father is born too in that moment. And it's this entire new life phase. It's this entire new version of you. And in many ways, I feel like it's the biggest spiritual upgrade that you will ever receive. And you will find yourself doing things differently, thinking about things differently, having your priorities in a different place. And I think that's a beautiful thing. I really do. I think it really humbles you and it changes you, but for the better. I found one of the best things about becoming a parent is that I had a much better sense of humanity. I have a really understanding of what that meant to be a parent and how much love and time and attention really goes into it, and what a gift that was. And I felt like, wow, if in the beginning of thinking about this as a spiritual upgrade, how much more open would I have been? Like how much easier would I have surrendered to the process or what was happening in front of me versus having that tight grip of control, which for me is always the default way. It's just wanting to control everything. And it's been the most beautiful transformation away from that control and more into living in the moment. I think kids and babies, especially, they're just these beautiful gifts from God. They are bits of heaven on earth, and being in their energy and being in their presence, there is nothing like it. And so, even though, yes, you may be sleeping a little less or things look different, you are holding this giant orb of light, like this spiritual gift. I don't know any other way to say it. And being present enough to notice that and really take it in and to go slow and to enjoy it. That's the entire point of it. It's not, the entire point is not to live your life as you always have, but to let them come in and show you the places where you're needing to work or to soften or to move into that next level. It's very much an up leveling process. And I think if I was able to see that or know that or had people talk about that part of it, I think so much of it would have been even cooler. And I think that was a gift for sure. Doing it the second time around was knowing that and noticing the magic that's right there, and that all the tiny things that they do and the tiny ways that they are, and caretaking and tending to another human, just how beautiful that really is. So I will say that overall, it was the best time. Like I really had a great transition from going from 0 kids to 1, because 1, I was mentally ready and I really wanted it. 2, anything was better than my pregnancy experience. And 3, being okay with that surrender and being open to things changing and shifting and knowing that it was for the better and in my best interest. And that babies, when they come into the world, I really believe they choose us as parents. They choose us because we are going to learn so many things from them as we are teaching them things, but they are such little teachers in their own ways, showing and guiding us where we need to go or where we need to evolve. And I think that, and being able to be present to that and present to the magic and the tenderness that is, especially in that first year, was such a game changer for me. So expectations and working through fears is one thing, but then also being right where you are. That first year with our first baby was one of the best years of my life. And I feel like that was never really talked about or said very much. It was all talked about maybe the harder things or the different transitions, but like truly that was, I think Kyle would say the same. It was the best, sweetest, most bonding, most special, just amazing year. And there's nothing like it. There's nothing like that first year with your first kid, because you'll never get that time back. And if you choose to have more children, it will look a little different because there's already another child there and you already are a family and your time and attention is very different. But having 2 parents with 1 baby, in my experience, it was very easy to figure out things and to trade off. And we both got plenty of breaks and alone time, and just we would switch off doing things. And it was very peaceful and happy and so sweet. And I hope that that can be an example. That is a possibility too. It's not only all hard or all lessons, but I look back at that time and I treasure that so deeply. Then for us personally, when we got to the 1-year mark, COVID started about 3 months later. So we had another year of that same insular, internal, just healing, just all about family love and all about the 3 of us. And it is just so special and such a sweet time that is so unique. And being able to recognize that when you're in it was the biggest gift of all. So there you have it. A little summary, a little background, some of the things I gleaned, some tips and advice floated in there. I hope that this is helpful for you in some way, or maybe you know a friend or family member that's about to have a baby or they're wanting to have a baby, and being able to think about a few things ahead of time, I think could be really helpful, especially when you're thinking about wanting to live your life in a very intentional way and in a very healthy way of taking care of your mental health, your physical health, your emotional health all along the way. It's just going to look different in different seasons of life. And so this is just a tiny example of how, for me, it played out. I hope that it was helpful just to hear. I always find it so helpful to hear other people's experiences and knowing that it's not mine. You don't have to take on any pieces of this, that this is the way it is or this is what's going to happen. Don't let anybody do that, by the way. A lot of people like to project their fears or tell you how things are the worst, but that's their own experience. And we are always in charge of how we see things and of our own experience of creating that along the way, of shifting things and changing things or doing it differently than the norm. And I think that's a really important thing to realize, that you do have a lot more say or control in the matter than just having things happen to you and that's just the way it is, or because other people experiencing it that way means that it's also true for you. That's just not the case. So just a little reminder today, and no matter where you are at in your season of life, I actually think a lot of these things can apply to any transition, any change, any things where your brain is trying to work overdrive to feel grounded and stable again, knowing that it is just a little bit of a process. There is no quick fix. Often it just takes time and willingness to try different things and to experience and surrender a little bit. I think that's where we usually learn the biggest lessons. Thank you so much for being here, for listening. And if you found this helpful, come let us know. If you also have questions, come find me on Instagram. We're doing a little post on my Instagram page for every episode in case you have any follow-up questions or things that you want to learn more about. I love you guys so much. We'll see you back here next week. If you enjoyed this episode and want more like it, make sure you're subscribed to the Simply Real Life podcast wherever you listen to podcasts, and maybe share it with a friend or two. That would mean the world.